Matt and Thomas Frank, Matt Karp and Thomas Frank. I don't know if you guys have met virtually.
We have never met. No,
we've never met. We talked on the phone once, I think.
Did we?
Yeah, I think we had a chat somehow. We emailed and then we had a phone call. It was memorable.
Was I giving you stock market tips?
Yeah.
It was like, well, tell me about your experience on the Katie Halper show. Well,
yeah.
Well, for those of you who don't know,
about how much we love the Democrats and
liberals,
aren't they the best?
So Matthew Karp is, let me just tell people who don't know, Matthew Karp is an associate professor of history at Princeton University and the author of This Vast Southern Empire, Slaveholders at the Helm of American Foreign Policy. And he's also a contributing editor, right, at Jacobin.
Yep.
And his work has appeared in The Nation, the Boston Review, and the London Review of Books. And he's working on 2 new books. I wanted to ask you, Matt, because you're good at this kind of wonky, nerdy stuff. And then we're going to get into how and why this happened. But let's talk about the what. So what actually happened this election? Like, how did Kamala Harris lose? What happened demographically?
Oh, I mean, I live in liberal land, like many of you. And I think everyone was afraid that 2016 was going to happen again. Like we've seen this tape before, you know, it's not, and somehow everyone found lots of different reasons for why it wouldn't happen again. And then, yeah, it did happen again. It was a different segment of working class voters who, in the end, rebelled against, left the Democratic coalition. But it was in scale broadly similar, and in form and in result identical. I guess more overwhelming in that, this time Trump won the popular vote. But yeah, I mean, essentially, and of course the conjunctural factors are different. It was a different moment. It was a lot more inflation. We talked about this time, a lot less about trade. I don't think people were thinking Kamala Harris was they weren't really pinning NAFTA on her in any direct sense in the same way that people did the TPP with Clinton. There are obviously sort of different policy issues in the mix, but I think fundamentally the sort of it is happening again element is people had in trying economic circumstances, people had little reason to believe that the Democrats, for all of their promises, were actually willing to stand up for them, and in as a result preferred to pick somebody who even has sometimes has wavered between making promises to stand up for them and just flatly telling them that that they don't matter, but at least is candid about it. And right. I think both Harris and Clinton sort of were trying to have everything both ways on the economic front, and succeeded in convincing I won't say very few, but just not enough, a decreasingly small share of the working class electorate that the Democrats were still the party of ordinary workers.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask both of you about the significance of trotting out Liz Cheney. Tom, at the end of your article, you called that party a party that goes to Dick Cheney, and Liz Cheney is is a corpse. And of course, Dick Cheney is close to being a corpse. So that's a good metaphor. But tell us about why Kamala Harris chose to appear with Liz Cheney so much.
So look, my take on that is that, by the way, I think one of the really devastating things about it, you remember in my New York Times article, I quoted from J.D. Vance's speech at the Republican convention. And one of the things that he did in that, which I kind of snickered at the time, sitting up there in the bleachers, was when he tried to blame the Iraq war on the Democrats. What a strange, silly move that is, right? Everybody knows that was George W. Bush's baby. And then
but it was bipartisan.
It was bipartisan, but I'll be damned. Then they go out and choose to campaign with the mastermind of the whole thing. So why did they do it? I think it's the same strategy that they have been trying again and again and again for years, and the same strategy that I used to argue with these political science types here in DC about, which is they have this idea of the median voter. I forget what's the name of the theory, Matt. You know this. What the median voter hypothesis is? That what it
Yeah,
is?
that's right.
Yeah, and the idea is that we know where the swing voters are. We know where they are because of math, geometry. They're in the middle, and they are these suburban Republicans. People like the people I grew up around, who are conservative on economic issues, but are fairly tolerant people in most other ways. And they always go back to this strategy, always, because that's kind of who they identify with. And so they tried it again, and at the same time, while they tried it, they downplayed or ignored or completely forgot about the handful of really pretty decent things that Biden did that you could build a campaign around to appeal to. And I'm about to say something that is always shocking to the political science mind. There's another group of swing voters in America, and they're not like right there in the middle like that. They're not, affluent suburbanites, and it's the working people that the Democratic Party has been hemorrhaging for decades now. And that's this much, in my opinion, a much more significant group of swing voters, but they always forget about those guys. And so they forgot about it's not like Biden was great or anything, but he did take really important steps. You look at what he did on antitrust. This is huge. That was a really big deal. And now I know it hasn't trickled down to people's lives yet, but it's still something that you can talk about and you can build up and you can tell a story about. And she didn't do any of those things. Biden also, his sort of amazing outreach to organized labor. Now, again, it hasn't had, great effects on people's everyday lives, but it will someday if you keep following. Anyhow, she chose to just drop all that stuff as though it had never even existed. I only heard at the convention. Now, to their credit, they did have a lot of speakers from organized labor at the Democratic convention, because they understand now. Too little, too late, right? But they do understand now that they've got to shore up their support with this group. But I only heard one speaker refer to the antitrust stuff, and then it was just in passing in a long list of things, and it was never. They never made a big deal about it at all.
Sorry, Tom, I just jumped.
Go ahead.
Narratively, I think you're so right about this, and I hadn't made this connection about the narrative. It was such a layup for them in a certain sense. And I remember a Times op-ed from Jed Purdy a few months ago, sort of actually trying, actually dropping the left wing, sort of the pose of left wing confrontation, and sort of, almost willing sort of to get on board and join the kind of Kamala brain trust and say, look, you guys want to have this freedom agenda. You're all about freedom and whatever that means for American foreign policy. I'm sure we don't like it, but here's how you can talk about antitrust and monopoly and corporate power and the power of bosses and labor and capital. And here's how you can talk about it in democratic friendly language like freedom. It doesn't have to be, you
like
can
the proletariat.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to sort of bring in the talking points from, the Jacobin reading group. You can kind of do it like Bill Clinton would have,
Right.
and yet you just hit these notes, or, honestly, like FDR would have. Obviously, that's trite, or any Harry Truman, whatever. And like that was there for them, actually, given, as you say, Tom, like some of the things that they did kind of on the margins that probably didn't affect the shape of the economy very much, and definitely didn't affect anyone's lives, and they didn't get rewarded for it. But it would have been enough for them to say, look, here's why we are really the party of, here's why we are really the only party that has even a chance of standing up against corporate power. But they made no effort, and even when Harris was, riding high, that was just not on the agenda.
And
Yeah.
wasn't she hamstrung by the fact that her brother-in-law, we now know from this allegedly from that Atlantic piece, where a Biden campaign person said that she stopped talking about antitrust because her brother-in-law, Tony West, who's an executive at Uber, told her not to pursue it.
Well, that's the theory. We
That's
don't
the theory.
know.
Yeah,
We
I
don't
said
really
allegedly.
know. We don't really.
I said allegedly.
Yeah. We
But that
don't
is
really
her
know for
brother.
sure. Yeah.
That is her brother-in-law, and he
Yeah.
is an Uber executive.
Yeah.